how to perfect this is that instead of trying to work directly against the string, so instead of trying to pull the string back by engaging the thumb more, what you actually do is instead apply more vertical force towards the bent fingers. So instead of pulling it back as hard as you can, press it up here and press down as hard as you can. And so therefore, that provides the most amount of engagement from the thumb while providing minimal reinforcement from the finger. And this is good, especially if you want to loose rapidly. And if you have bows that are supple, then at that point, you don't really need a double reinforced thumb draw at that point. It's not a very heavy bow. We know the Persians were not shooting for the sake of power, or, I mean, some power, like they had to get some velocity to it, right? But the thing is that they weren't trying to maximize that. What they were trying to do is maximize the efficiency of their loosing between arrows, right? And the idea behind this is that when you get people who are really good at shooting rapidly between shots, so you can get up a high volume of arrows, and you have a bunch of men who can do it, what you can do is basically have the ancient equivalent of an area suppressing tactic. This is something that we see the Parthians do at Archery, for example. They were able to circle around the Roman lines, outmaneuver them, and put up a high degree of volley fire because they're so good at rapid volume-based shooting that the Romans basically had no choice but to entrench in one place, basically giving the Parthian cataphracts enough time to basically smash through them. So they were immobilized. This thumb draw is the way it is. It provides minimal reinforcements because the Persians basically didn't need a thumb draw that was very tight. They needed something that was very loose, so that way it works economically with their goals of how they were trying to shoot, which is to shoot with smoothness and to shoot with rapidity, right? So to go very quickly between one arrow to another arrow, as well as the fact that they had techniques that did actually increase the velocity of the arrow, but not by way of the draw weight or the length that you draw back, but instead how smooth the draw can actually go. Hence, we do have profession in these Furusiya traditions, which is later Middle Eastern traditions, wrongly usually associated as Arab archery. That's actually kind of a misleading title, but it's beside the point. But instead, it's actually meant to be sort of a oblique technique that they call, and they attribute that to the Persians as well. And the idea behind this is that it actually decreases the security of the draw in order to allow a little bit more smoothness to fly off the thumb. So there's less leverage over the string, but the idea is that it has less thumb to clear at that point. One without the oblique technique basically would look like this, so long as you catch the string with that thumb ring, press that thumb into the other reinforcing fingers, and then bring this down so that way it's a very light reinforcement. All right, and so therefore, like this is actually called the Hasros draw by the Berber archer. He's not even Arab. Well, Armin Hermer has taught people on this technique, and it's supposed to be considered sort of a sliding release. Instead of you doing this, which is very awkward, instead you still play off of the engagement of the thumb on the other fingers. So this is still in there, but instead you go something akin to that, so long as your thumb ring doesn't really get in the way, right? And so press that in, sort of slide out. So instead of opening it up, instead you slide. Basically a more ergonomic release with this. And that's supposed to increase the efficiency as well as the potential velocity in your arrow, because again, it's sliding off with less interference. This. Eventually, you know, it does kind of come off. It eventually does get into this position, but we start off, the first part of the release is this slide out instead of a coming out. So in this case, we're using the momentum in our thumb pressing against our finger to our advantage. The reason why the Persians did this is, as I've stated before, based on what the Roman sources say about Sassanid archery, is that much more concerned about maximizing this tactic of high volume based shooting in order to keep up this tactic of area suppression. We're forcing a formation to keep their shields up so they're much more immobile, they're more blinded, and so that way these cataphracts can maneuver freely and finish them off. So Persian cataphracts and Persian horse archers, and just in general, those archers actually work in tandem with each other. It's sort of like a combined arms assault, but the ancient Persian version of it. But the idea is that you can easily move between shots, you know, and not have to worry about a blunted release from a tight lock. So what they needed was a thumb technique that worked economically with releasing very quickly and immediately going in. They had suppler bows, we know that. The Roman sources say that, two of them actually say that, so we can actually kind of trust it. And most other sources, that they're very good at shooting a lot of arrows in a short tandem, you know, in a short amount of time. When we look at the Persian manner in Roman archery, I can say that something of a 20 variety, just like this, either this or this, it really is the same thing, because the Romans were trying to shoot rapidly, but specifically trying to discharge, use the sort of rapid draw technique to be able to maximize the total energy buildup using kinetic energy to then impart more velocity into the arrow. And so they also needed a technique that was smooth. This basically has that idea of discharging the arrow rapidly, either with an oblique version or even with a regular version. You see this is sort of the difference. You know, not a huge difference, right? But again, this idea is meant to have the arrow get released, and because there's less interference, there's less friction to pass by, it therefore is less impeded and can go a little faster for that reason. And every little detail actually counts. It's not a huge detail, but every little detail actually counts, especially when you're talking about Persians there who are very meticulous, and especially Arabs who are extremely meticulous about these little soft factors in what makes techniques work. All these thumb draws are made to be facilitating a goal of shooting. And so we know the Persians were doing it for the sake of volume. For that reason, they needed a thumb draw that wasn't as secure, but can impart a smoother release. And in this case, as the Middle Eastern writers have said, that it is about shortening the short and lengthening the long, hence this, as well as there's a technique for lengthening the short and shortening of the long as well, also called vahram. The idea is both the same, it's just two different ways to do it. But the idea is that it's supposed to be a smoother release compared to a generic thumb draw, or at least what we would consider a generic thumb draw. All the Middle Eastern writings of Qudusiyya is almost entirely Persian in origin, with some other things sprinkled here and there, basically. So that is my presentation and my reasoning. Thank you, and I bid you happy shooting.